Mercy's Resurrect ultimate, by far, hands down, is her best ability in her kit, and could arguably be one of the best ultimates in the game. I like to classify the res into two different ways, two basic ways you can use it. There's the solo or two-man res, small reses that can swing fights in your favor, and then the big ult-wide 4 or 5-man res that can save a game or an entire push. I think the most important thing for Mercy players, especially before resing, is to keep track of who has ults, and that's as well on your own team, but as well as the enemy team. There's nothing worse, at least for me when I'm resed, the feeling of getting resed right into a nano visor or a diva mech bomb. As Mercy, you want to keep track of your teammates' ults, but it's just as important to keep track of enemy ults if you can. If a Tracer's playing pretty far forward and aggressively, try to keep mine for Pulse Bomb. Try to stick away from your bigger tanks or larger teammates. Reason for that is if they get stuck, you can always come back and res them if two people die. But if you get stuck and are going to die, you're not going to end up killing a bunch of your teammates anyways. And this works for any ultimates, really. So just try to figure out where enemies play around certain things. It's sometimes a dead giveaway by the way they're playing, that they have ult or that they're going to try to go for some combo. So the solo res is I usually see it on tanks, or I usually use it on tanks myself. I want the tanks back in the fight, especially Reinhardt. If you res a Reinhardt, you're essentially bringing back a teammate that is 2,000 plus health, and that's going to be able to protect your team. Having him in the fight is always important. You'll always want a shield. If your shield goes down and Rein dies, res him, you just win shield battle again, if that's what you're doing. But you want to be careful when solo resing, because sometimes you'll solo res thinking, oh, okay, well, they're down one, we're down one, resing this will bring it to a 6v5 in our favor. But if you res a Rein or something, a Genji can still come in, use his ult, and kill off your backline and your tank the same way. If you're not careful with knowing who has ults on your team and who has ults on the enemy team, like before, you can sometimes throw your ult away by using the solo res. So try to keep that in mind. So the main power of the solo res comes from the ability to swing a fight in your favor by more manpower, or by bringing back a specific teammate that has his or her ultimate. So if your teammate goes down fighting somebody else, brings it to a 5v5, if you res your DPS or whoever was fighting that fight, brings it to a 6v5 in your favor, that can usually win fights. Again, with the ult management, it's usually good to keep an eye on that, because sometimes solo resing the key tanks that have ultimates, if Rein has hammered down, you might want him back in the fight if they're going to go for a huge push. Having Rein is always important. A soldier that was maybe killed off behind or too early that didn't get his ult off in time, you can resurrect him back and give him a second chance at using his ult. Try to keep track of where your teammates are as well as your enemies. Sometimes teammates die off in strange places, and if you res them in that location, it can actually be a significant advantage for them. If a Genji doesn't get to use his Dragon Blade behind, and you fly in, res him, fly back out, or maybe stay with him to damage boost, they're not going to be expecting a Genji solo res behind most of the time, or a soldier behind. Another key thing is to keep a track of your teammates' health. And that sounds pretty normal for a support to do. So many times, it's better to wait a little bit if you can, and let someone die to res, because res is essentially giving full health back to your teammates. It's just amping them up to full health within about 2 or 3 seconds, however long the res phase takes. And that's really, really important. Say 2 DPS die, they've got about 7 seconds on a respawn. Well, you can actually wait a bit if Rein's low. Tell Rein to drop his shield, or maybe Rein's just dying anyways. Yeah, you can start to heal up Rein, but you can let him die and then res all 3 of them at the exact same time so that they're all full health. And you can also bait out ults that way. If you have a few people really, really close to death on the point and some of your other teammates have fallen, sometimes people will use ults to finish off those low health heroes just to get it over with. And in that time, you can bait out the ults, res, and just deny them of what they've just done. Mercy in general as a hero, I think, requires a lot of game sense. Just knowing ults, who has ults, both teams, positioning with Mercy is really, really important. Knowing when enemies are flanking, listening out for that, keeping track of just everything really. So the 4 or 5 man res is the ult wipe. If you can tell at a time, like say 1 or 2 people die, yeah, you can res them, but if you're keeping track of ults and you're in a safe spot, you can usually tell when an ult wipe is coming. So you usually just hang back and res that. The one last thing is to remember, and this can work for all heroes, is don't hold on to your ults forever. So many times this happens. Mercy's hold on to res, they're waiting for that 4 or 5 man res that can swing a fight, when really they could have just resed, a key tank or a key DPS to win a fight then. It's a really, really fast building ult. You can build it in about 27 seconds if you're constantly healing. And just because you res your team doesn't mean that you're going to win. It's a team game. And you need everyone working together and doing their job the best that they can. And use your own judgment too. If your team's screaming res, 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 and you don't think it's actually needed, then don't do it. Just try to keep track of ults. Maybe they don't know something that you do know. Mercy's an extremely fun hero to play, and I like her for how different she is compared to all the other heroes and all the other supports in this game. But her resurrect ability is kind of tricky to use. With a little practice, it's not that hard. Just try to keep track of important information and do your best. That's the most important thing.